At 56, Rick James finally addressed one of the most talked about rivalries in music history, his turbulent, magnetic connection with Prince. For decades, the two men seemed locked in a silent duel, the loudest voice in funk versus the quietest genius in pop. But when Rick finally opened up about it, what he revealed wasn't anger or resentment, it was reflection. The camera lights glowed softly in the studio that day. Rick sat back, older now, his energy slower, but his mind sharp. The years of fame, chaos, and self-destruction had stripped away the performance mask. What remained was a man ready to tell the truth about the only artist who had ever truly challenged him. The beginning of a rivalry. By the end of the 1970s, Rick James had built an empire out of rhythm and attitude. Street songs made him a household name, and his outrageous stage presence defined the look and sound of funk. He was bold, fearless, and entirely unpredictable. Then, out of Minneapolis, appeared a figure who seemed to exist outside every rule of music. Prince was younger, smaller, and almost impossibly self-possessed. A musical prodigy who blurred the lines between gender, genre, and expectation. Rick initially saw him as competition, not inspiration. When they crossed paths backstage early in their careers, Rick was loud, surrounded by friends and noise, while Prince stood in quiet observation. The contrast was almost cinematic. Two different energies meeting for the first time. The silence from Prince wasn't shyness, it was calculation. From that moment, Rick sensed that the younger artist wasn't just entering his world, he was rewriting it. The Clash of Kings. As the 1980s exploded, so did their rivalry. Rick ruled through charisma and chaos. Every performance a party, every night a celebration of rebellion. Prince, on the other hand, built his legend through precision, choreographed shows, obsessive rehearsals, and a mystique that drew people in without a single word. They both wanted dominance, but in opposite ways. And in the unforgiving world of fame, there was only room for one king of funk. Industry stories painted their interactions as tense. Prince once refused to open for Rick on tour, a quiet statement of self-worth that infuriated and impressed Rick at the same time. At award shows, they would pass one another without acknowledgement, Rick all flash and laughter, Prince expressionless behind dark glasses. The competition fueled them. Each release from one seemed to push the other further. The brighter Prince's star burned, the harder Rick worked to reclaim the crown. Shadow and reflection. In time, the rivalry became less about fame and more about identity. Prince's art was built on discipline and introspection. Rick's art thrived on instinct and danger. They were opposites, yet their music began to intertwine. Rick's later shows became more structured and dramatic, echoing the kind of staging Prince had perfected. Prince's live sound grew rawer, more aggressive, tapping into the gritty energy that Rick had pioneered. Whether they admitted it or not, they were influencing each other. It was rivalry as evolution, two forces pushing the boundaries of funk until it became something entirely new. The cost of greatness. While Prince continued to rise, Rick's battles with addiction and fame began to erode his empire. The wild persona that once drew crowds now consumed him. Prince, by contrast, tightened his control over every aspect of his life, his image, his masters, his privacy. He became what Rick couldn't: untouchable. As the years passed, Rick's anger softened into respect. He began to see Prince not as an enemy, but as a reflection of what discipline could achieve. Late life realization. By the early 2000s, Rick's energy had mellowed. He spoke of the past with a kind of detached honesty that only time can bring. When journalists brought up Prince, there was no bitterness left in his voice, only admiration. He acknowledged that Prince represented the perfection he had chased in his own chaotic way. One man had mastered the storm, the other had been swallowed by it. Yet both, in their own fashion, had kept funk alive through sheer will. Rick began describing their connection not as rivalry, but as balance. One embodied freedom through control, the other, control through freedom. Both were necessary for the art to evolve. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the stories behind music's most iconic legends, make sure to subscribe. There are more untold truths and timeless rivalries on the way. Parallel paths. Even when they weren't speaking, their paths continued to cross in the echoes of their music. Prince's precise grooves mirrored Rick's earlier sound, while Rick's later songs carried traces of Prince's melodic ambition. Friends recalled that after hearing Purple Rain, Rick sat in silence for minutes, absorbing every chord. He didn't criticize it. He didn't mock it. He simply listened. And though he never said it publicly, those close to him believed he understood in that moment that Prince had achieved something transcendent. It wasn't envy anymore. It was acceptance, mirrors, and meaning. During a little-known interview in 2002, Rick described his connection with Prince as one of mirrors. He saw in Prince everything he once hoped to be: fearless, clean, completely in control. Prince, meanwhile, could never ignore Rick's influence. Behind the polish of his artistry was the raw, unfiltered energy that Rick had introduced to funk years earlier. Their stories were intertwined. One was the storm, the other the stillness that followed. The silent farewell. When Rick passed away in 2004, the music world mourned the end of an era. Prince did not release a public statement, but during a concert in Los Angeles shortly after, he performed a quiet instrumental that wove the bass line of Super Freak into the rhythm of controversy. Fans recognized it immediately. It felt like a goodbye. One artist saluting another in the only language they both truly understood. More than a decade later, when Prince himself passed in 2016, Rick's old interviews resurfaced across the internet. Clips of him reflecting on their shared journey spread everywhere, accompanied by messages from fans who finally understood that their rivalry had always been rooted in mutual respect. The legacy of two titans today, their influence is everywhere. Bruno Mars, The Weeknd, Anderson.Paak. All carry echoes of Rick's swagger and Prince's precision. The fusion of funk and pop that dominates modern music exists because these two men refuse to be ordinary. Rick gave the genre its raw pulse. Prince gave it its soul. Together, they built a bridge between rebellion and refinement that still stands. Reflection and redemption. In his final years, Rick often spoke of music as redemption. He saw his younger self in every artist who chased the spotlight without realizing its cost. Prince represented the opposite, the artist who tamed the spotlight and used it as a weapon. Their relationship, once marked by jealousy, had transformed into something spiritual. They were two reflections of the same idea, that greatness always carries a price, and that respect often comes only when the noise fades. The final word. When Rick's old radio interviews replay today, one line seems to capture it all. He said he didn't regret the rivalry because without it, he might never have reached his own limits. And without Rick, Prince might never have had anyone to test his. Their story is no longer about conflict. It's about legacy. Two stars orbiting the same sun, each giving the other gravity. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold histories of music's greatest legends. From rivalries to redemptions, we're keeping their stories alive, one beat at a time.